Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right?
Buying down property taxes without reform has not worked. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Today, we are proposing a 3% cap on growth. If the entire 3% isn't used, the remainder can be carried over for up to 5 years. This will encourage cities, counties, schools, and park districts to budget prudently and plan ahead.
Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you. The audio you just heard is our new governor, Kelly Armstrong, addressing a joint session of the legislature for the first time, giving his State of the State address, which, of course, much like the State of the Union address, the national level is something that's required by North Dakota state law and kicking off. And it included, obviously, the governor running through some priorities. And I know there's a lot of things that we want to talk to him about. Governor Armstrong, you made some points about prison space issues I think are really interesting. I want to ask you about also creating a new cabinet position, which I think is really interesting. But obviously, because it was, really the first policy area you tackled in your speech, I think everyone agrees it's the number one policy issue heading into this legislative session. It's property tax. And you put a humdinger of a plan on the table. Tell us a little bit about it. I mean, how did you arrive at this being the approach?
Well, I said it yesterday, I didn't mean it. We've started since June. We started talking to a lot of different legislators and different groups. I've met with Chad in his other capacity on these issues. And I mean, most of it's not new. I mean, none of these ideas necessarily are new. I do think there's a couple new things that we put in. The overall structure is unique, but we campaigned on it. We promised to deliver a proposal, and it was important to me that we did that right away. The first part's the reform. This is the piece that I think is actually essential, and that's 3% caps on local property tax budgets. That means the budgets can't go up more than 3% on existing property year over year. And if municipalities don't use the whole, or political subs don't use the whole cap, they can bank it, and for a period of up to 5 years to engage in prudent planning. And particularly I always think of smaller municipalities, you need an equipment shed, you're not shovel ready, expansion on a jail, and you deal with that. But what it'll do is it'll make sure that your property tax statement can't go up by more than 3% from the previous year. And then the relief part is we're going to expand the $500 primary residential credit. And I should back up. When we were doing this all across the state, I mean, the number one frustration we heard was from people on their homes. So you can either diffuse this across the entire space and not actually deliver like relief in the same manner, or you can pick where people were the most frustrated, and that's what we chose to do. So we're increasing the primary residential credit from $500 to $1,000. That's $310 million to the general fund. And then we're also taking the bottom stream of the legacy fund earnings. Half of that currently goes to SIF, half of that goes to the general fund. We're diverting it to additional primary residential relief in this next biennium. That'll be additional $1,550. So everybody will see $1,550 relief. We're going to direct that we create a fifth class of property so that you don't have to apply for this credit. It'll be automatic. And I think the most important part of this is that legacy fund stream will grow as the legacy fund grows. So you don't need future legislation to do it. but nobody will get more than zero. So if you pay $1,000 in property taxes, that extra $550 will go back into the fund to continue to deliver more relief to everybody. When that fund gets to $2,000 in the legacy fund, so it's $3,000 total in property tax relief, 50 cents on every dollar of growth. And this is probably the one piece that I actually had the most impact in as far as a new idea. And that is because I've spent the last 6 years in DC. 75% of our money is spent before we ever get there. When we pass this proposal, we are obligating future legislatures with this expense. So when that fund gets to $2,000, 50% on the growth will go to pay off the general fund expense, and the other 50 cents in the growth will go to more property tax relief. So eventually the general fund expense will get to zero, and everybody's primary residence will get to zero.
A couple of points of clarification. I think and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong. One thing is that 3% cap, it's on the bill itself. So if a community is experiencing a lot of growth, if they see 10% population growth, they could still benefit from that because you're going to have more residential properties come online. So if
the next year that'll be existing property tax.
Right. So if the tax base gets bigger, they're okay. And then the other part is that, it's kind of a snowball effect, right? Where as the legacy fund contribution grows, as we hit more and more people are being removed where the credit, they're getting their entire bill wiped out by the credit. It snowballs. And your argument was, or I think the numbers I saw, we're looking at most property, like primary residence properties, being basically not paying a tax because of the credit within a decade.
Yeah, and I think a couple things. One, it delivers the most relief. We had a lot of conversations about mills versus buy downs versus all of this, but I think it delivers the most need to the people who need it the most. Everybody's going to get to zero, but we're going to deliver it to the most people who need it the most. And when those houses go off the rolls, the people who are still on the rolls will get that excess funding, and it'll happen quicker.
So I have, first of all, kudos, Governor, for leading with this and getting it done. You said you were going to do this during the campaign. I know that some proponents of Measure 4 said, yeah, we've heard this before, but you're actually trying to deliver on what you said you're going to do. I'm still a little confused by the caps, right? So my house is in a taxing district for a school, a city, a county, and parks. So, but my total bill will not go up by 3%. Like, how do you make all four of those work together? Because as a taxpayer, I just look at that bottom number. I don't care if it's
the existing property tax budget as the whole for a sub cannot go up by more than 3%. So if you have a 25% valuation increase in one neighborhood and you don't have it in the other neighborhood, I theoretically one could go way up, but then the other one would have to go way down. Like, there's no local incentive to play. What they're going to have to do is, I think what the original frustration on property taxes has been, Chad, they're going to have to reapportion mills. If $10 million are worth 100 mills in 2020, and now all of a sudden in 2024, $10 million is 94 mills. They don't ever buy down the mills. This was the best and simple is probably the wrong word, but this is the only way to not write code that decouples true value from assessed value to taxable value. So this will allow locals to deal with their budgets, but politically, there's no one. You don't get somebody to be nobody who's really excited can vote twice for you, right? So it doesn't make a ton of sense to make one group of people really, really angry. And so it's going to allow for planning, but also it's going to force reapportionment of mills.
So one other really quick follow-up, one of the things we heard during the Measure 4 debate was agriculture property. And often, like, when you're trying to pass a bond in a small school district, it's a lot of big farmers who are taking on the majority of that property tax bond. This doesn't affect agriculture land, correct?
Well, it affects it in that it cannot go up more than 3%. And ag land is really, really susceptible to that. Somebody comes in and buys a quarter for a whole bunch of land or for a whole bunch of money because they want to shoot ducks or shoot pheasants, and you start doing comps and you get into that position. So, I think every farmer in North Dakota, if you told them they were only going to have a 3% increase on inputs next year, would take that deal. So there's not, the relief is going to primary residences, but the cap will affect that land as well, including business and commercial.
So this is going to put some pressure on, because the 3% cap is on my total bill, right? When I get the statement, it can't be.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes, but it's on the political subs budget,
okay,
which will come to you.
So so the park district can go up by 3%, the county can go up by 3%, but there's not just a 3% slice of the pie that they all have to fight over.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm glad we cleared that up. And then when you mentioned creating a fifth category for property, what you're talking about is primary residences, right? That's the category.
And that's so you don't have to apply for the credit. But it will be, and I mean, that's going to take some work, where it's going to take tax commissioner working with counties to make sure we do it. But I mean, technology and hard work will make this so it's delivered to people without having to ask for it.
Well, it shouldn't be that hard, because every taxpayer is going to get to declare one primary residence. I mean, nobody's going to be able to do two. You can't say, well, it's my lake cabin and my house in town. It's one, and it's no commercial property, nothing else. It's only primary residences. I think that's really important to drill down. One thing that I heard from people right away, I mean, and when I wrote about it, the cap really seems the linchpin to this, because without the cap, if the cap somehow gets separated or it doesn't become a part of this is just another buy down, right? I mean, you expressed we can't do more of that. So we have to have the cap in order for the rest of this plan to work, right?
Yeah, when this plan goes through, 50% of the local share of property tax can be paid for by the state. Over 50%. Like, we have a say in the growth in their budgets. I mean, I've told you guys this before. I've been here. I voted for those things. I voted for the 20 mils for social services. I don't know how we would justify spending another $500 million with growth in state funds without any control. I mean, a lot of this conversation has been between the state and the locals, or the local political subs. We have to start having a better conversation about government and the taxpayer.
So, Governor, I really I appreciated your conversation about property taxes, but my favorite part of your speech was when you talked about Grandma Mert and your new hire, Jonathan Holt, who's an absolute rock star, and congratulations on hiring him. And I'm not just saying that because he picks out really good restaurant and knows a good meal, but I think he really cares about this stuff. We won't talk about the stuff later in the speech I hated, but can you talk a little bit about what Jonathan's going to be doing? Sort of, the people coming out of prison, addiction, all that kind of stuff. It seems like it's really, really important. And it's one of the parts of the speech that I think really showed some of your passion for something that maybe people don't understand.
Yeah. I mean, I've been working on this stuff at a policy level since I got elected in 2012. I've been working on it as in a professional manner since I got sworn into the bar in 2004. First Lady Catherine Burgum did such a great job with Recovery Reinvented. John Holt was the executive director of that. I had the opportunity to bring her to DC to talk to the bipartisan working group on addiction when I was in Congress. The best way I can honor that legacy is bring an old street lawyer's view to it. And that's what we want to do. We want to bring Jonathan into the cabinet, and we want to maximize and operationalize those relationships between the legislature, DOCR, behavioral health, and more importantly, I think counties and local county commissions, city commissions, addiction counselors, and combined with Free Through Recovery and Community Connect, we have to get creative to solve these solutions. We don't have enough addiction counselors in Bismarck or Fargo. We're not going to have one in Hettinger. I mean, I would love it if we did. And, you could get a kid from Hettinger who goes to school for that and come back. But we have to figure out how to do this. And the outcomes when you develop these programs, one, they're less expensive on the taxpayer, but they also work really well. So now it's just a matter of how we figure out how to deal with that and utilize technology, utilize high-intensity outpatient treatment. And the reason I bring that up is because if you can figure out that, then you can deal with some of that pretrial detention as well, which is a huge reason why our county jails are overcrowded. So I'm really excited about it. In government, you don't ever really create something new. But this is a new thing. And I texted him last night and I said, I'm really excited. And we get to make this what we want it to be. And I have some really good ideas. And I know he does as well, as how we can do this.
I wanted to drill down on your comments. You said very bluntly, I'm going to quote now from your speech, your prepared remarks. You said, our jails are full. We need to address the overcrowding in our correctional system. We cannot build our way out of this. We need an approach that's smart on crime, not soft on crime, finding practical solutions that will increase access to services while reducing the reliance on our jails and prisons as treatment centers is a top priority of our administration. I think that's great, and obviously that's in line with things that you've been working on since you were a state senator. I was wondering, though, is there some tension between that and there was a recent news article where Attorney General Drew Wrigley is really pushing. He was very passionate about it last session. He's made it clear. He says he's willing to lock horns again this session for minimum sentences. Now, mandatory minimum sentences. So these two things seem at odds with each other. Is there tension there between those two policy initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have the space. I mean, but we're going to work on some real practical solutions, and hopefully, I mean, we give our budget address next Wednesday, and I really try not to. I want to make sure before I deliver solutions that I have the solution in place. But one of the reasons is just a matter of timing. So, I mean, in how things are going. But I think I think we have. None of this is cheap. I mean, it's expensive to incarcerate people. It's expensive for the state. It's expensive for the county. But we're really excited. And I am 85% sure that I'm going to be announced the cheapest and quickest way to free up some real correctional space and create some new space in the system by next Wednesday at the budget address. But yeah, all of this, I mean, anytime you are forcing somebody into prison or jail, that is a space that has to be taken by statute. So it allows no discretion anywhere. I mean, that space there's no discretion in that space. None. So that means you have to make discretion somewhere else. So and there's a state hospital proposal. There's a women's prison proposal. DOCR is going to come with an expansion. I mean, there's a lot of these programs that exist, but none of those beds are available until 2030. Like, that doesn't solve anything for the next 6 years. So it's going to take a real coordination and cooperation with counties, knowing which counties have extra beds, how we utilize that. But I'm excited about at least one piece of this that I'm hopeful that we get to introduce on Wednesday.
So have you and the Attorney General talked about this?
We got briefed. My office got briefed about the bill yesterday. I actually had kind of a busy day yesterday. I haven't even looked at it yet. So,
okay, but do you suspect you guys will be able to get to some sort of same page on this stuff, or is this going to be a fight?
I don't know yet. I mean, I've spent a lot of time. I mean, we elect prosecutors, we elect judges, we elect sheriffs. I mean, I have more faith in the men and women in black robes across the state making those decisions than necessarily anybody here. So I've generally never supported minimum mandatories. Nobody's ever shown me the data that they actually deter what we're trying to deter. And I think they lead to a lot of that stuff. So it's hard for me to figure out where I'd get on a page where I'd like it.
Kelly, another thing, and I know you were talking about school choice, and I know Chad's got some very passionate feelings about this. And it's taking the form of education savings accounts. I know we don't really have a bill yet or a specific. You're expressing general support for this. There's a lot of facets to that, and I think there are elements of it that aren't that controversial, which is to say parts that are dealing with, making money available for families to pay for tuition or what have you for kids. But there are other pay for like tutors or whatever. But there's another part paying for tuition. Give us your philosophy. What parts of this would you support?
Well, I think first of all, we don't have a bill, and I think there'll be more than one. And the discussion happened last legislative session when I wasn't here. There were discussions over the interim. The House will have a version. I'm sure the Senate will have a version. Lieutenant Governor Strinden is really passionate about this. So we support giving parents more control and say over their education. But the policy really matters, because once you start one of these programs, it's going to be there. And so as we work through it, we put it in our budget. We support the idea of money following the student. And then, by the way, and this is the part Chad doesn't like, That's public school, homeschool, non-public schools, but we want to make sure that we get the policy right. Yeah, we want to make sure there's a lot of, I mean, I don't get a vote on any of these bills. You guys know that. So, and I think there's already, I mean, there are competing ideas in both chambers and our office, and we're working towards figuring out what that looks like by the end of session.
Yeah, and I think that is really going to come down to like what is included, like what are eligible expenses and what aren't eligible expenses. I think that's going to be the really end, and who gets the money and does everybody get it at the same level? So the policy really does matter, because I'm not blanketly opposed to education savings accounts. I'm blanketly opposed to public dollars being used for private schools, right?
Yeah.
And so if we can use it for different things, and so anyway, I think once we have a bill and we could have Lieutenant Governor Strinden or Senator Axman or somebody like that, we can dive deeper into the policy.
Well, and once this goes, right, this is one, I mean, these are one of the reasons I wanted to buy off the general fund expense on property taxes is once you do it, it's there and you are obligating future legislators to deal with it. So, I mean, when you do new policy like this, you're probably always going to come back and tweak it. But if this program needs to be successful, which means it's going to grow over time. So getting it right is important.
So Kelly, on that same front though, as a Republican, why not just give a tax credit to everybody with a child and let me spend the money however the heck I want without setting up a big government program?
Well, I think the answer is because you're specifying it in a very specific place that people want to deal with. There is a lot of different people who have a lot of passion in this space, and I think it is the right approach. I mean, Chad, you and I've talked.
Well, what happened to Republicans just wanting me to keep my money and spend it however I want?
Wow,
the government telling me what I can and cannot spend it on. What's happening here, buddy?
Because we're dedicating money for K through 12 education. It's a specific policy area in the government. I don't want you out there buying a jet ski.
I hate jet skis. They scare me.
Nobody's ever sat on a jet ski.
Well, I don't know how we got on jet skis. Let me, one thing, just switching gears a little bit. You throughout your prepared remarks, I noticed repeating a phrase, try new things. And I thought that was really interesting. And I thought that was, first of all, good. I mean, especially starting with like the property tax debate, where it just seems like we've been trying the same approach over and over again, and it's just not working. So try new things. I think that's great, because again, somebody who's been covering legislative sessions for more than 2 decades now, we have a lot of the same debates over and over again. So this idea to be very intentional about let's have new debates or let's change the debate. I mean, I guess that's my question for you. To tell us the meaning behind that. Why did you choose that phrase to sort of hammer down on?
Well, I think one of my frustrations, you're right. I mean, by the way, it's not just us. Go watch the first episode of The West Wing.
Sure. Yeah.
They're talking about the same things 25 years ago I've been talking about in DC for the last 6 years. And I think one of the things, I mean, you'll see some of this in our budget address, right? We get 3 weeks. So it's hard to, I mean, I had a very strict rule when we came in here. We had December 15th conversations and May 1st conversation, because we have to get through a legislative session. But I'll give you an example. And I don't know, I mean, like, I want to take care of the things we have. Like, I mean, when we have money, and North Dakota's been on an incredible 20-year run. I talked about that. But I think we have to start looking even on like large infrastructure projects, how we fund those, how we obligate future legislators for hundreds of millions of dollars. And if you spend $150 million on planning and siting for a project, and then the rest of the project's going to cost $500 million, if you don't have the money for that $500 million, you just wasted $170 million. Like, that's how I view that. And, when you have biannual legislatures and things like that. So it's not just in the space of, like, addiction's easy because we don't have the resources, and we won't have the resources. So if we don't try new things to get people treatment and move them upstream, we're going to deal with the same back end problems that are really expensive. So I think there's easy places, but also there's things in how we fund things. We should have a more honest and robust conversation about what that looks like.
Governor, one last question. Do you miss Congress?
I do.
Really? You great?
I mean, I love being home, but yeah, I mean, it was a really big part of my life for 6 years. It was an honor being the only voice in North Dakota. It's a lot easier to miss it less knowing Julie's out there. and she's going to do a great job. But I miss the crazy and I miss the chaos. That doesn't mean I'm not happy to be home, because yesterday was a really great day. It was a lot of fun.
Definitely. And one last question too. Your speech was historically short. And in fact, I went back and looked at every State of the State address, going back, and I don't think we had one in the Burgum era that was under an hour. And in fairness, I didn't go back and look at previous governors, so I don't want to make it sound like
Well, I think his first State of the State was right around a half hour. I'm just, you guys know, I mean, I talk too much on these things, but the most valuable thing you can give anybody else is time. They're starting a legislative session. They have 81 days. We're working on our budget address. I spent a lot of years in courtrooms as a public defender. I figured out the longer you were talking, the deeper you were probably digging your hole. And I like short speeches. I think the policy comes from from proposing our budget. I think it's easier to do it. I think you can keep attention longer, and you can get out what you need to get out without doing it for a long period of time. It's just stylistically, I've always given shorter speeches.
I will say, as somebody who's interviewed you a lot, back when you were when you were first getting into this, I would have you on the radio or whatever, and I would ask you a question, and you would give me like a 1 or 2 word answer, right? So I would ask the questions, and then
Sometimes no is the answer.
Right. Well, the thing is, I appreciate that, but as an interviewer, like, I'd ask you the question, and then I get ready to take notes, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, I got to ask another question. He's done. So anyway, that was kind of funny.
I will tell you, as somebody who's lobbied Kelly on things before, I appreciate the very short no or yes answer. There's no BS coming from Governor Armstrong. He'll just let you know if he's with you or not.
And it's one of the things I've talked to, we're making changes, and we'll have another announcement, or it went out this morning, and, it's just way easier to have like more hurt feelings happen it's weird to me, because in politics, no matter how you got to where you're at in politics, you had a fight somewhere, right? You had to win a district convention, you had to win a primary, you had to win a general. I mean, eventually at some point in time, when you run for office, you're in that. And it's fascinating to me that people that do that are so afraid to tell people no. I've always believed no is the second best answer you can hear in politics, and it's the only one you can trust 100%.
I once wrote a column on how the word no, like your ability to say no, is central to every right that you have. But anyway.
And it's not personal. It's a policy difference. Like, it's not like, if I disagree with Chad on something, it's not that I'm not going to still give him crap about the Dodgers afterwards, or
it's world champion Dodgers to you.
All right.
It's easy to tell someone no if you're honest with them. Where you end up getting into problems is where you don't, if you're not honest with people.
Well, we're going to end the interview there before Chad gets a fat head about the Dodgers. So, Kelly, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to having you on again as the session unfolds.
Thanks for having me, guys.
The cold cases you see at the Vault have captivated readers across our region for years. At the Vault podcast, our team of professional reporters takes you further into those stories with new interviews from family members, investigators, and experts. Check out The Vault at inforum.com/The Vault and subscribe to The Vault wherever you find your podcasts.
Welcome back. Just finished up our interview with Governor Kelly Armstrong, and a lot there to unpack. There's a lot of moving parts. I think, Chad, that debate over prison space is going to be an interesting one.
He and Drew are going to go after each other
Because
this session. It's going to be interesting to watch.
It's a policy area that Kelly is very, very passionate about. He's been his whole political career, criminal justice reform. Obviously, he worked as a defense. He called himself a street lawyer, worked as a defense attorney. So that's going to be interesting. And the Attorney General, we saw last session how passionate he is on the other side, mandatory minimums. It got to the point where he was almost vitriolic in his approach to that. So what happens with, I think there may be some fireworks there, but we're going to find out. Anyway, we're going to switch gears. Our guest now is former United States Senator Heidi Heitkamp. Now, Senator Heitkamp is currently with the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, and they have been working on what I think is a very fascinating policy area that maybe hasn't really been talked about enough in North Dakota, because it's something called the Chevron Doctrine. And essentially, the Chevron Doctrine was a a court case, because we all know how many, like when we're talking about EPA regulations or whatever, it seems like all of that gets litigated. I mean, everything is being sued over, and so the courts had a doctrine that they would apply, and essentially, and the senator can correct me if I'm describing this incorrectly, but essentially it was that the courts would defer to federal agencies' interpretations of the law. So basically, if a federal agency was saying we have the authority to do this, the courts kind of defer to that. The U.S. Supreme Court struck that down, and now it's kind of a brave new world of regulation. We all know how important that regulation is in North Dakota because of agriculture, because of energy. So what does this mean for North Dakota? And the senator, through the Institute of Politics, is working on what they're calling a bipartisan roadmap for how to approach this. Because one thing that I think this really does is it tells Congress, hey, you guys have to really make laws now, and you have to make laws that are matter, and the courts aren't necessarily going to be there to write the law for you. Because Heidi, is that fair? It seemed to me at times that Congress kind of was doing Mad Libs with regulation, like they would write something and then just expect the courts to fill in the blanks, and I don't think that's good for anybody.
Yeah, I've been calling it purposeful ambiguity. And part of that is the problem with the Congress itself, which is, they don't do things by regular order. They don't sit and debate amendments and the language of amendments and ask questions back and forth. What does this mean? How will this be interpreted? It's all done in these reconciliation packages at last minute. And so they're huge, and people want to get stuff done. And so they're willing just to throw the spaghetti on the wall, hope it sticks. Let's get it done and let the agencies sort it out. Well, the Supreme Court has said not anymore. The Chevron doctrine is the most quoted piece of jurisprudence in the history of the court. And it basically said, as you described it, Rob, that when things are ambiguous, if they're clear, the court would clearly reverse an agency. But in the face of ambiguity, that the agencies have the expertise, and we're going to defer to their expertise unless the decisions they're making are arbitrary and capricious. And so what the court basically did, and they've been whittling away at this doctrine over the last 20 years. Now, I do, for all of the conservatives who listen to your show, Rob, I will mention that it was the Reagan administration and Department of Justice that pushed for the Chevron doctrine. And this is what I tell all of my friends who are on the more liberal side of the Democratic Party. Look, you're giving as much authority to a conservative agency run by a conservative president as you are a liberal president. And so Congress needs to exercise its Article 1 authority and actually make the laws. And that's what the court is basically saying. No more of this. Now, ironically, in the last couple weeks, you remember the net neutrality decision that came down. There have been dozens already of lower court decisions that have already cited what's called Looper Bright, which is the decision that reversed Chevron. And so one of the foundational pieces for reversing net neutrality has been actually the Looper Bright decision, saying we're not going to give deference to the agencies anymore. And so just one correction, I'm doing this work with the Bipartisan Policy Center, which is a kind of bipartisan think tank that was created years ago by Trent Lott. Yeah, no, that's okay. Yeah, bipartisan group basically saying, it's really hard when members are in the fight and in the politics to really see good policy. And so we're going to kind of talk about what we need to do to implement the Looper Bright decision and force Congress to be maybe more responsive in identifying what they intend to do when they're basically saying that we're going to legislate. And so, it's interesting. We're in kind of the final stages of trying to nitpick our way around a big, broad issue. But this isn't a new issue to me. I took a lot of lumps when I was in office because I paired up with Rob Portman to do a regulatory reform package, basically saying the court is eventually going to reverse. And so one of the Chevron. And so one of the things I do want to say is that the court specifically left open the decision on non-delegation. And so is the delegation of authority for legislating that's transferred to these federal agencies, is that unconstitutional as a violation of separation of powers? The court did not reach that point in this, but that's looming in the background if the Congress does not kind of effectively implement the Looper decision. And so we're in the process of writing, how can we do a better job writing legislation? How can we do a better job identifying where the discretion is and where the discretion isn't? Because if in fact there's been a direct delegation, then we're in the delegation argument about whether that's a violation of separation of powers. And I know this all sounds really legalese, but it's stuff that I've been working on for a long, long time.
Well, Senator, thanks for coming on today. I will tell you, until I was sent the article about the bipartisan group that you're working with, I wasn't all that aware of the Chevron doctrine, and it sort of scares me now when you talk about we're sort of going into this brand new world of how we're going to implement big pieces of legislation. Do you think, like, it seems to me the public's not aware of this, and how this might affect things? But then, can you also talk about who's involved in this bipartisan work with you? I think Mel Martinez, but are there other former electeds on both sides, bureaucrats? Who's all involved in this?
Actually, it's more scholars. I mean, if I can kind of put that then, but people who have served in and out of, positions in office. That one person that I really wanted was a guy named Howard Shalansky, who was the head of OIRA, which is another whole. It's a division of the Office of Management and Budget that basically oversees the regulatory process. And Howard and I did a lot of work together. He was, in fact, an Obama appointee, a redhead, so of course he's got superior IQ. But we're as diverse as the National Resource Defense Council is represented, along with the Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch group. We have subject matter experts in terms of people who litigate and who have been working on administrative law, and then we have the Business Roundtable. And so we have a good smattering. But one of the things, we had a meeting yesterday to just kind of get our three kind of overview pieces kind of put together. And so what we're really looking at is legislative drafting. How can that process be done better? How can we have more expertise? Deference and discretion and direction, which is really kind of trying to explain what this means and what could happen. And then, a request that people really think about what kind of legislative record are you creating? What's the history of why you're doing this, that you're creating, that the court can look to or that agencies can look to? And then kind of looking at what's the capacity of Congress to implement this, because they've been dodging legislating for a long, long time. And that's why, I mean, it's not just this problem with delegating to agencies. You've got now executive orders that have moved into the void that was created by Congress basically punting. And everybody thinks, they don't really intend to do that. Yes, they do. I mean, they don't want to take a political risk by actually making a decision. And that's a big problem with Congress today. And so Looper Bright basically says, no more. You don't get to punt these decisions. You actually have to have a debate. You actually create a record on why you're implementing this. A big open question here for me is, how is this going to apply to current regulation that was written before Looper Bright? And it's interesting because the court said we're not applying this retroactively, which means that you could open up all of this regulation to the new standard. But they did say if the impact on an individual is new, that regulation could be looked at. And so I think there's a lot of people kind of looking backwards saying, okay, what does this mean for something like waters of the United States, which I think was a famous overreach, continues to be a ball that gets punted back and forth for American agriculture. By that, I mean, when the Democrats are in charge, they have an expansive view of what is navigable waters under the Clean Water Act. When the Republicans are in charge, they have a narrow view. And, I tried with Jim Inhofe to actually legislate, which is what you should do when there's, a 30-year legal controversy. We weren't able to get any traction on either side because no one wants to take a risk and actually compromise to the middle.
One thing I think, Chad made the point that a lot of the public maybe doesn't understand what the Chevron doctrine is. but I think that the public understands what the impacts on politics have been.
Yeah.
Because I would argue that one thing where you say, well, Congress is so dysfunctional and they never do anything. Okay, well, this is what we're talking about. This is one of the reasons why. Or why has the heat been turned up so much, particularly in presidential politics? Well, it's because from a minute we've put so much power in the executive branch, but through Congress basically doing this and punting on what you described as their Article 1 authority, and they're not writing the laws anymore. So it changes. You go from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. Well, that's a huge whipsaw in obviously ideology and approach, and obviously who you think is right, kind of depends on your politics. But the thing is the stakes are now so high with presidential elections because of this. I mean, no wonder and there's obviously there's other reasons too. There's no singular reason for it, but this is certainly a reason why I think presidential politics is out of control, is because the stakes are so high.
Well, because they de facto have usurped Article 1 power. And now we have a situation where, is there going to be any guardrails on Article 1 power? People keep asking me, well, what do you think, how is this relationship between Trump and the Congress going to work? And I said, Trump has no interest in negotiating any of this with Congress. And that's Barack Obama signed tons of executive orders inappropriately, in my opinion. Biden signed tons of executive orders, frustrating. DACA. Let's talk about
George W. Bush.
defending on.
George
Yeah,
W. Bush
I
did.
mean,
Yeah.
this has become the normal way of basically dealing with tough issues, whether it's student loans on the Obama side or on the Biden side, or whether it is, drilling. You just saw the executive order on drilling. And, Congress has gotten incredibly lazy and risk adverse. And that's really the problem, is that they don't want to take a risk. They'd rather, get their 5 minutes of fame or 2 minutes of fame on national television, as opposed to actually sit down the way it used to happen and carve out a compromise. And compromise, in terms of the base of both parties, has become a dirty word.
Well, and I think we're seeing that with, I mean, there's hardly any blue dogs left in the House. You think about the Senate and losing Tester and Manchin and Brown to a certain extent. I mean, thinking about the amount of moderates that were there in 2012 on the Democrat side when you were elected compared to today, what do you think that means for the ability of Congress to actually do? I mean, I'm struggling here to think of any moderates on the Dem Senate caucus right now off the top of my head. I suppose it depends on the issue. Yeah, depends on the issue. Yeah. So how does that play into all this? I mean, obviously the elections, and
Well,
the way we do. Yeah.
I would push back a little bit, Chad, on kind of defining it, because you've said, look, it's going to be moderates who carry that banner. Look what James Langford, who is actually a dear friend of mine, what James Langford tried to do in terms of the border thing.
Yeah.
He's not a moderate, let me tell you. But he's somebody who says, I've got a job to do. I'm going to try and do it. And, there's people like Todd Young. There's people like, Martin Heinrich. I mean, when we did the compromise on opening up oil exports, we were able to do that because we gave certainty on wind and solar tax credits to that side, along with an exchange for opening up oil exports. That kind of was the last kind of, no one thought when I started that effort, no one thought we could get it done. But there's always a compromise to be had. And the one thing I would tell you, people say, well, what about your time? And I said, I had a bill that had both Sheldon Whitehouse and Mitch McConnell as co-sponsors. And that's because we tried to find that spot that there was win-win for everybody, and that people were delivering for people back home. And the one thing that I would say, Rob and Chad, is there used to be a point in time in American politics that if you actually did a good job, you got rewarded regardless of the initial behind your name.
Right.
That's not true anymore. We have, as you have said, we have politicized these Senate races to the point that although I would say in this cycle, one of the trends that hasn't been talked enough about is that we did have split ticket voting. Otherwise, Jackie Rosen wouldn't be there. Tammy Baldwin wouldn't have gotten reelected. Elise Slotkin wouldn't have gotten elected in Michigan. And so, Gallegos wouldn't have gotten elected in Arizona. And so that the idea that there is a margin, but that margin is smaller than it's ever been in American politics.
That was going to be my question, because the courts obviously have made it clear what they're going to do. They have a new, the Chevron doctrine's gone. I guess you could say there's a new doctrine now. And that means that a lot of these, what maybe we would describe as being overreach from the executive branch or these executive branch agencies, probably going to get struck down now by the courts. But I think what your group is trying to do is create a roadmap for Congress. Like what is Congress going to do?
Yep.
And one thing that I'm trying to wonder how we get around is, where are the political incentives for Congress to do anything other than what they've been doing? Because I don't perceive that a lot of people who are serving in Congress right now, House and the Senate, care all that much about making policy. I think they care a lot about being entertainers. And I think there's people on the right and left that we could talk about in that context. How do we make it? At some point, the voters have to care about this. It's one thing to tell Congress, this is what you have to do, but you just said it. You used to be rewarded for doing a good job, and partisanship mattered less. That's not true anymore. So how do we recreate the political incentives that'll make Congress do this? Because that's what they ultimately respond to.
Yeah, Rob, if I knew the answer to that question, I could fix everything in America. I wrote an op-ed for the Peterson Group Institute that is particularly concerned about debt and deficit. And, everybody's like, oh, here's the formula for fixing this. I said, none of this is going to get fixed until it becomes an election issue, right? None of this is going to be on debt and deficit. People don't vote debt and deficit. They just don't. And until people start saying, I'm going to be, this is my top issue, which is that we're going to be fiscally responsible in this country. That's the only way Congress is going to pay attention to actually getting some fiscal responsibility in America. So I think the headline on my op-ed was, forget the structure of how you structure it. This isn't going to happen until you make the debt political. And by that, I mean a voting issue. And the same is true on all of these other issues. And so, and just about the time, I think the cautionary tale for so many members who may, in fact, want to take risks the way James Langford did is don't do it. Don't do it. You won't get rewarded. Plus, somebody will come in and tube it at the end. And people always ask me, well, what happened to the Senate? And I said, the Senate went by the Senate's challenge has really been led by leaders who used to lead the Senate. Now they lead political parties. Mm-hmm. Now, I would suggest to everyone that they listen to John Thune's speech when he, his maiden speech as majority leader, really engaging. He's somebody who I think believes in the institution. It's going to be interesting to see if he can live up to the words that he wrote and spoke.
So, Heidi, do the Democrats in the Senate need new leadership?
They didn't get new leadership. So the question is, hi. And the one thing I would say, Chad, is there is going to be kind of breakout stars that will come, that will kind of structure what the Democratic message is. But I expect that what we're going to hear in terms of the Democratic message is going to be driven by Democratic governors. It's not going to be driven from the White House or from Congress. And so they may rattle sabers and, say we're going to be doing this and doing that. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be the governors, the Democratic governors, who are going to kind of revamp the Democratic message and revamp the Democratic priorities.
So in terms of this, creating a roadmap for Congress, I realize you guys are still, you're still meeting. This is very much not a finished product, but can you tell us sort of where your head's at? What sort of things are you guys going to put on the table in terms of what can be done?
Well, I think the first thing is internal procedures and rules, which is, you hear it, Rob, over and over again. The Senate's got to get back to regular order. The House has got to get back to regular order. And that what prevents regular order is leaders don't necessarily want committee chairmen to be powerful or to kind of dictate the policy. They want to control it. And so getting back to regular order and getting back to actually having hearings, advancing amendments, debating those amendments for a period of time that gives the public and the courts a record of why you're doing what you did. And that's going to require increased staffing. And I think that, you take somebody who's brand new, who stands up on the floor and jots down, and can happen, jots down an amendment on a napkin, throws it into a bill, gets enough political support to pass it. Who knows why anybody's passing that amendment? And so, to me, there needs to be a discipline to the internal process of actually legislating. And I think we're going to be making recommendations that hopefully um, uh, will be listened to. Legislative action, consider codifying delegate deference regime, consider amendments to the APA. This has been, I will tell you, the Administrative Agencies Practice Act, which is, kind of what dictates how agencies make their decisions. And, I would tell you, I have scars from the work that I did on regulatory reform, but I think if they went back and looked at what Portman and I proposed, it was actually responsive to Looper Bright before Looper Bright existed. And so I think there's arguments about requiring agencies to give more guidance, requiring agencies to engage earlier in the legislative process. One of the things that shocked me, because I came from North Dakota, right? And so if somebody was legislating something on AG's power, I would go down and testify and say, this isn't going to work, and let me tell you why. And I would engage with the legislature. You don't see that kind of interaction with agencies in terms of actually making decisions. And so we're really looking at agencies being much more engaged, the authorizing agencies being much more engaged um, uh, in a process that helps write legislation. They may not agree with it, but let's make sure we all understand it. And then I think when you look at how the courts, how the courts might reverse, and then is there an opportunity for it? Let's take something like FCC regulations, net neutrality. And let's say that was, in fact, not an executive order, but that was, and not a unilateral agency decision, but that was something that Congress legislated. Well, once that decision is, okay, we think you've overstepped your bounds, agency, FCC, then giving the Congress a period of time to rectify. And so I think it's all kind of, it's process, but it's process that should lead to a better outcome in terms of legislation. And here's a great example. And I think, Rob, you've been writing about this. I had no idea that small businesses had to register under some bill. I just did that for my little business. And these are the kinds of things that really anger the American people. Like, "Well, I didn't know that was going to happen." Well, that's not the kind of thing that was ever debated. It just kind of got thrown in there.
I want to be clear. Heidi was talking about Ohio Senator Rob Portman, not me. I used to receive
Sorry.
I used to receive Senator Portman's tweets sometimes, and people get really mad, and all of a sudden I'm getting a 1,000 tweets, and it's like I'm not the senator. I don't have anything to do with it.
It was pretty clear based on Rob's body language that every time you mention Senator Rob Portman, that Senator Portman is Rob Port's favorite senator of all time.
Yeah, well, he's got a great name, I got to say. One last question. The one thing we're waiting on, I guess the question that was left open when the court struck down the Chevron doctrine, which you referred to, was whether or not they were going to say whether it's constitutional for Congress to delegate what amounts to legislative authority to executive branch agencies, which is essentially saying, them saying to the EPA, "Hey, EPA, you can write law in this policy area." And that the courts have left that an open question. Do you think the court should shut that door? Because I kind of feel like they should shut that door and tell Congress, hey, you guys need to spend less time on cable news and more time writing law.
The one thing that's interesting is that this isn't just like, okay, everybody sees a line and that's excess delegation, right? And one of the reasons why you may want, at least give some agency authority. I mean, who do you think's better equipped to have a discussion on how we implement new AI regulation, artificial intelligence regulation? And that's why I'm saying we need to staff up with more expertise in critical areas like national security, like AI, like the things that are complicated. And so, these are lines and as I said, the court left open the possibility that they in fact will call things excessive delegation, violation of Article 1. You have to go back and revamp and call it unconstitutional. So it's going to be it's a whole brave new world. But I want to kind of calibrate this because I said that this will be probably 8 months ago said that the Chevron doctrine decision will be the most consequential of that Supreme Court session. I think it is, but I think there was enough erosion of Chevron by different kinds of decisions that it's not as dramatic as what people think. But it is a wake-up call, and it is an opportunity for people to then, on a bipartisan basis, because as I've said, am I going to like every decision that Trump's EPA decides? No, I'm not. I want them to follow the law, whatever that is. And now they get to interpret the law. And do they want excessive discretion? I mean, and I think that when people who have been defending Chevron really look at what can happen on the other side, which is now the 4 years of more conservative readings of these laws, that will hopefully drive an incentive to actually legislate and to actually create a system that will provide more clarity to the American public in terms of what you're legislating.
Well, the country's been getting whiplash going back and forth from administration to administration. Yeah. That's just got to stop. Heidi, thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, Rob, one of the things that I tell a famous story about, a regulatory issue that I was involved in when I was tax commissioner, and it was big money issue. But, we were back and forth spending millions of dollars in litigation. And then I realized, why are they fighting me so hard? And I realized because I was creating a system that did not provide certainty. And so, I kind of said, let's settle this. And then go to the North Dakota legislature and create a system so you know exactly what you owe when that gas comes out of the wellhead. And, within hours, we had resolved an issue because I understood that the challenge that they had in not having certainty and predictability as of regulation and implementation. And so these are really pro-business belief, that certainty. And, you can decide one way or the other. Frequently, I'll have major CEOs tell me, I don't care what your rule is, just tell me what it is so I know. And the problem that you have right now is we don't have any certainty in regulation.
Tell me what the rule is, and then let me live under that rule without it, flim-flamming back and forth.
Or let me go back to the Congress or the legislature to get it fixed.
Sure. There we go. Heidi, thank you so much for your time. By the way, this is a fascinating discussion. I think it's a topic area. Again,
we probably bored the crap out of them.
Oh, our listeners are they're inured to it at this point. They're used to it. It's a huge
I'll let you know when we issue our final report.
Well, good.
Which should be sometime in March.
We may have you back on. I appreciate it, Heidi. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
You bet. Take care.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Well, we're gonna wrap up. Those are two very big interviews, and that last one, I realized maybe some people's eyes were rolling back into their head, but again, this touches on why is Congress dysfunctional? Well, here's a reason why. Why are presidential politics just flipping out of control? Well, here's a reason why. It touches on these things. It is really important. Although the one thing about this is I don't think anything's going to change until voters want something different. And I don't know that voters want something different right now.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, first of all, Heidi knows her crap, man. Holy cow. Clearly not something that she just fell into in the last 6 months or so. She's been thinking about this for a long time. But I think that the analogy she used around the budget deficit, until people start to care about the budget deficit, we're not going to do anything about the budget deficit. Until people care about the fact that Congress isn't legislating and instead they're giving, and I kept thinking this whole time, yeah, maybe I do want bureaucrats who are experts making these determinations more than, like, she talked about AI. I don't want Mitch McConnell deciding the details of AI. I'd rather have an expert in the field. But they do have to do their job.
But we don't live in a technocracy. We live in a we elect representatives, and the thing is they can be informed. Like, you can still get that expert input. We see it in the bill. We see it in the legislature all the time. And that's, I realize lobbyists are a dirty word, but that's the function of lobbyists, by the way. They bring in, they help, hey, I represent the aviation industry. I represent the artificial intelligence industry. So let us give you input. Let's school you up on what we're doing.
Right.
So it's one of those things that are just hugely, hugely important that not nearly enough people are going to care. And I guess me having the Heidi Heitkamp on was trying to maybe force people to care about it a little bit.
And again, she knows her stuff. I think people should care about this. I thought it was interesting at the end where she said, this might not be as bad as I thought it was 6 months ago because they'd already chipped away at it. But when you guys first described it, like I told you, I've read one article on this. I've read one article. It probably could show with my performance the last 30 minutes. But when you guys were describing it, it's like, oh my God, this is going to be terrible or good. But it's going to be like such a huge change to the way Congress acts. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think so much of the dysfunction in Congress is a product of institutions abandoning their responsibilities and ignoring regular order. We're just not doing the work anymore. Everything's a shortcut. Everything is just get it out of my face so I can go do more politics. And
to your point, and to Heidi's point, until voters start rewarding folks for being good at their job and not being the best interview on cable news or the right party
or the best tweeter or the best TikTok star,
this is a point in time where that stuff matters more than being a quality legislator.
Yeah, I mean the voter. I mean, and really that's it's depressing as it is. The problem is us, right? I finally, by the way, Chad, I'm glad that you're finally joining me in blaming the voters for things.
Yeah, but you're much more straightforward on it. What's the saying about never trust the intelligence of the average American voter or something like that?
Right. Yeah. Nobody ever went broke underestimating the intelligence of the American voters.
Yeah.
Which I'm not quite that cynical. But I mean, at the end of the day, like so many times I hear people complain about why is Congress doing this? Why are you reelecting them? Right? I mean, every cycle, most of the incumbents get elected. Even in so-called wave elections, most of them stay in office. The voters have something different. I mean, it really starts with the voters.
I will do the same thing I always do to defend voters. We are not normal, Rob. People normally have real things. They have different interests that they spend their time on rather than engaging in good government, and that's a problem.
Maybe, but it's I mean, we got some low-hanging fruit. It's not hard to look at some of the people who are serving in the legislature this session and say, even ideology aside, there is a competency issue here that you should not be there.
Before we started recording, I told Rob that I watched my first legislative hearing and ethics executive director Rebecca Binstock, who's been on the show before, was testifying on a bill that they're introducing. And the first question of the first hearing I watched was from Representative Jeff Hoverson, who started by saying, "I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. What's your name again?" And it was just like, "Yep, there we are. There's the North Dakota legislature."
Well, there's Representative Robertson. Let's not.
Yeah,
There's
that's
many,
fair.
there are many fine people on both sides in the legislature who are competent, good public servants. But
95% are good and competent, but it just felt so like, all right, here we are. Boy, the block in town. Jeff Hoverson's asking that question to start out.
but my rebuttal to your argument about, well, voters are busy. I don't know how busy you have to be to notice that Marjorie Taylor Greene is completely unfit for office.
Yeah, I mean, my bigger concern there, Rob, and then now I'm not defending the voters, is that might be what they want in their elected official. And then that goes back to the original point of
We sent Trump to office again, and I mean, it was
by a large margin.
by a large margin, won the majority. Didn't win a majority of the vote, but won the popular vote, a plurality of the popular vote. And it wasn't like his problems were a secret.
Yeah. And speaking of Trump, I mean, I don't know if you noticed 2 days ago, there was a peaceful transfer of power.
There was.
We're back, baby. We're back.
Yeah, it was nice. I hate to say that it happened because the people prone to not wanting a peaceful transfer of power won. Ergo, they had no reason to be violent again. January 6th again, and I wrote about it, and that was one thing I kind of took a shot at our attorney general, because one of his push for the mandatory minimums is that we got to protect cops, and I just have such a hard time with that argument, with Republicans saying back the blue, protect cops, while they all lined up behind a guy who's going to pardon January 6th people who put 140 cops, or injured 140 cops, put 12 of them in the hospital.
Yeah, no, it's tough to, I mean, always back the blue, except for when we don't.
Yeah.
Isn't as but going back to what we sort of hit on before Senator Heitkamp's interview, this Drew Wrigley, Kelly Armstrong, I mean, issue regarding prisons and mandatory minimums, this issue is in both of their wheelhouses with very different perspectives on it. And it just feels like this is going to blow up.
Well, especially, I mean, if there was a difference of opinion between Wayne Stenhjem and Jack Dalrymple, I feel like we wouldn't see a lot of it very publicly. Right. But Kelly's a very direct person. Drew has proven he has no problem sort of going after hammer and tongs people who oppose him on this issue. We did it last session. So, I have a feeling there's going to be some fireworks, and it's going to be very, very visible, and it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, don't you think? I mean, there's like, Kelly's speech, governor's speech. It's weird that to call him Governor Armstrong, right? I mean, he's only been governor for 3 weeks, but still, it feels weird. But he is governor. But his speech, focusing on this, trying new things and all that, I think it was a really good message throughout the speech. But I'm not seeing it in terms of actual legislation yet. It feels very much like the stuff that's being discussed is the same stuff that was discussed 2 years ago. So I think things like the prison overcrowding and some of those things, they might spark up something that I think there's going to be a variety of different things that end up being much more controversial and much more significant than we've identified at this point in the session.
Yeah. No, I mean, ask me in a couple months, about the try new things thing, and we'll see if we're there. I think it's true on property taxes. I mean, we're finally getting, I mean, we've talked about caps before. If they implement a cap, that's definitely going to be trying a new thing. That was one of I had somebody call me yesterday, and they're like, well, how is Armstrong's plan any different than the buy downs we've done in the past? And the answer is the caps. We've never done the caps before.
And the caps in a thoughtful way where there's rollover, right? I think that's the other thing. So it's not so strict. So there's no flexibility.
We're not setting out punitive. We're going to hurt, we're out to stick it to the local, even though maybe some people feel like the local governments might deserve it a little bit. There's it's thoughtful. I mean, the cap is very flexible, but it is there, and it is important. I mean, that package without the caps is a non-starter.
And the investment so this continues to grow moving forward, I think is also important. So it's not just, hey, we're going to give you $1,500. That's going to be because at some point people are going to say that's not enough as that 3% keeps getting higher. So the fact that relief is going to grow along is really, really good.
I think one of the sleeper challenges to that issue, real quick, as we wrap up, is also the fact that he's touching the legacy fund. There is a group of lawmakers who don't, that's like a third rail for them. They don't want to touch it. They don't ever want to do anything with the legacy fund. Does that cost the plan enough votes to topple it? I don't know.
Right. And I mean, I think he also talked in a speech about trying to find other places to cut. I mean, boards and commissions and some of those kind of things. I think it's good to have a new perspective and somebody with a legislative background. I think it's going to be interesting. Again, there are things that I fundamentally disagree with Governor Armstrong, and we'll have 4 months to talk about.
Well, we're gonna have some Donnybrooks over education savings accounts. I know. We're gonna put a pin in it there. By the way, thanks to Jessica Bell and Michael Bell for sitting in for us. They did a great job. So thankful to them. Really appreciate that. Thank you for listening. This is going to be an exciting legislative session. Lots to come. Auditor Josh Gallion is going to be on the show Friday. He's wanting subpoena power in his office, so that's going to be an interesting proposal. Also, we're going to be talking about the North Dakota United poll that came out with some things about school choice, also some things about school lunches and things like that. We'll be talking about property taxes. They definitely want property tax reform. We'll be talking about all that on Friday. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening.
I hate jet skis. They scare me.
Nobody's ever sat on a jet ski.